My name is Marie Nightbird. I'm one of the presenters today, along with my colleague Kelly Allison, and we're both from the School of Social Work. We have slides to guide our presentation today, so I'm going to start walking us through our slides. I would like to start by acknowledging that while we're all joining this workshop from many different areas, that what does unite us is the work that we do on Musqueam land, which is the land that UBC is situated on. We would like to acknowledge that UBC is on the ancestral, traditional, unceded territory of the Musqueam people. You've likely heard that acknowledgement at different events up at UBC. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge how the Musqueam community members speak to this. They say, Musqueam people have been here as long as there has been land to live upon. We have lived in the area of our present location for thousands of years, and our traditional territory occupies what is now Vancouver and surrounding areas. So in this slide, what you see is a post carved by Musqueam artist Brent Sparrow Jr. It describes the creation story of Musqueam, and it was posted 2016 as a reminder of whose land UBC is situated on. I would invite all of you to take a moment and look at the post, and there is a plaque there that does describe the creation story. And if you haven't seen the post, it's right across from the bookstore and Starbucks. So for today, for the hour, we'll talk a little bit about the benefits of peer feedback and why it might be particularly relevant for online teaching that we're all doing in a very short time. We'll share our experiences of using a peer feedback assignment in a social work class and some of the results of our scholarship of teaching and learning research we did regarding this assignment. And finally, we want to give everyone a chance to think about and discuss how you might use peer feedback in your context, what tools you might need to explore to do that, and what might some of the challenges be. So our learning objectives: by the end of the session, you'll be able to articulate the benefits of peer feedback in online teaching, describe how peer feedback was used in social work class, and describe how peer feedback could be used in your context. Now, throughout our discussion, we welcome everyone. If you have questions as we go along, please feel free to either use the raise hand function. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's in the center. The little person with the hand up, or to use the chat function, and we can answer the questions throughout. And at the end of our presentation, we have allotted time for further discussion. Either we can stay in our large group or we can go into smaller breakout rooms. So I like to now pass it over to Kelly.
Great, thanks, Marie. So I wanted to talk just a little bit about the evidence for peer feedback. So many of you may or may not have read some of the teaching and learning literature about peer feedback, but there has been lots that have been written about peer feedback as a powerful tool for student learning. We know that incorporating peer feedback helps students become more active in their learning, as they both provide feedback on the work or progress of their peers and as they receive feedback about their own work or progress. And this process helps students develop the skills to evaluate what constitutes effective work. And it helps them determine what they might need to do differently to further their own progress. And finally, it helps students learn how to give feedback that is meaningful to their peers and helps them move beyond simple praise or seeing feedback as only criticism. So that's a little bit about sort of why we use peer feedback. When we talk about feedback, it's important to distinguish between formative and summative feedback. These are two types of peer feedback that can be used that are both useful. So formative feedback is feedback that's given during the learning process that students can use to make adjustments to their work or progress. Usually, students are taught what to give each other feedback on and guided on how to provide feedback around specific criteria. So an example of this might be a history student who's asked to give their peers feedback on a draft essay regarding their writing style and the evidence supporting their argument before the students hand in their final essay for grading. So in this example, the feedback is constructive feedback that the students will use to help them make revisions before submitting their work for grading. So that's an example of formative feedback. And in our context, we have had students give each other feedback on their developing communication skills before they're graded on their final counseling session. And again, so that our example is formative feedback. Summative feedback, on the other hand, is when students actually do the grading of their peers' work or assignment according to certain criteria outlined in a rubric. So an example of this would be, let's say, nursing students who are doing oral presentations that are being graded and are given feedback by their peers, and their final mark for that presentation is an average of all their peers' mark. So that would be an example of summative feedback. So both types of feedback are useful and can benefit student learning. It's just important to know what type of feedback best fits your goals for your teaching and for your students. So when we think about moving into next semester and probably next year, as we move into sort of online teaching, this concept of using peer feedback for enhancing learning is even more appealing. Unfortunately, online teaching, there's just going to be less opportunities for students to ask their instructors those quick, informal questions before and after class. Online learning inherently has less opportunities where students can informally chat with each other, develop relationships, discuss assignments as they wait for class to begin. And so we know that online learning inherently has less opportunities for students to do these quick check-ins to ensure that they are on the right track and meeting the expectations outlined for either a specific assignment or for the course in general. And that's where peer feedback opportunities or activities can come in to be helpful to allow students a way to meaningfully engage with each other, build a learning community, as well as assess their own learning and progress in the absence of these more informal check-ins. So Marie's going to tell you a little bit about our context and how we used a peer feedback assignment in a social work class.
Great, thanks. So as I mentioned earlier, Kelly and I both teach communication skills class in social work. And the class is one of the first classes that students take when they join our program. It's a 2-year program. There's about 54 students who are in the course, and it's divided into 3 sections. So we each have about 17 to 18 students. It's a core class that teaches communication and interviewing skills for professional social work. And how we have structured the classes, which we have 3-hour classes weekly throughout the whole year. The first half of the class is based around small lectures and small group discussions discussing key skills and the key concepts that we wish to introduce for that week. And then the second half of the class, we have students engage in practice labs. And in order to do this, they break into small groups, into triads, groups of 3. And one student acts as a client, one acts as a counselor, and one is an observer. And we often have scenarios for the student who is in the role of a client, just to guide them, especially at the beginning of the year when they're getting comfortable with the process. And it's in this context that we incorporate a lot of verbal feedback. So the person in the role, the student in the role of the observer will provide feedback to the counselor. And then as instructors, Kelly and I will also join in the triads, and we will provide feedback. And we found this to be quite helpful in terms of demonstrating the skills of feedback, as there are, I would say, ways that are really helpful in providing constructive feedback to students. So what we found over our time of teaching this course is that students really have found the peer feedback they received as being very helpful in the development of their skills. It also, we have found, has increased engagement and provided opportunity to establish relationships with classmates. So these are just some of the things that students have shared with us over the time. So, you know, because they told us that they really appreciated peer feedback, we decided to investigate this more formally with a Scholarship of Teaching and Learning research project. And what we wanted to know was, is the anecdotal evidence true? Does peer feedback help in their learning of communication skills? Is a more formalized process of peer feedback, where students write down their feedback, more beneficial than verbal feedback? Which part of the peer feedback process was helpful? Because we had them both evaluate themselves, evaluate others, and then reflect on how they might incorporate that evaluation into further skill development. So there were several steps in terms of the feedback process. And finally, we wanted to know if there were any other benefits to giving formal feedback that we did not know about. And when we were working on our research grant, we realized that it would be important to provide students with guidelines for giving feedback. So although we do talk about it and do demonstrate it, we felt that students would benefit from having more specific training regarding this for the formalized peer feedback assignment that we developed. So Kelly and I developed a guide for peer feedback, and we used this during the time when they were giving the verbal feedback, and then we also incorporated it into the written peer feedback assignment. And in this guide, we taught students about the qualities of constructive feedback, that it needs to be timely, specific, behavioral based. We taught them how to give feedback, how to start with positives, provide observations, and then give them some pointers on how to receive feedback. For example, how to truly listen to the feedback, ask clarifying questions, and I think it's important to always thank the person who's provided us with the feedback. And finally, we went through each of the skills that we were teaching them and provided them with specific criteria on what to give feedback on. So for example, when we were demonstrating attending skills, when we wanted them to provide feedback on the attending skills the counselor was to practice, we asked the observer to look for things such as eye contact, the position, if they're facing the client, leaning forward. So guides in terms of what to provide feedback on specifically. Now, just to give you a greater sense of the assignment that we designed to integrate written peer feedback into our class, students are asked to partner with a classmate and to tape a 10-minute practice session. At this point, they had taped other sessions for assignments, so it was very important for them to know that the tape itself was not being graded. So after taping the 10-minute session with a classmate, they uploaded it to CLAS, Collaborative Learning Annotation System. Their first step was to watch their own video and to make 5 annotations feedback on their own video as a counselor. They were then to review the tape of 3 of their peers and provide 5 annotated comments. And after they received all the comments from their peers, they were to review the feedback and to write a 2-page paper on how they would integrate that feedback into their communication skill development going further. Now the assignment was worth 10%, and this is just an example of the rubrics that we created. And you'll see that we divided the assignment, the marking of the assignment in half. So 5% went to the quality of the feedback. So if it was specific, if it was constructive, ideas going forward. And then 5% was the description of the integration. How are they going to incorporate the feedback that they received? And this is where the guide, we found the guide came in quite helpful in terms of providing how they could provide specific feedback. And I think Kelly will now show a bit more about the CLAS, the system that we used for this written feedback assignment. Okay, Kelly.
Sorry, I had my mic on mute. Thanks, Marie. So as Marie indicated, we used a tool called CLAS, the Collaborative Learning Annotation System. And CLAS is a tool that allows students to upload videos, images, text, or audio files. And depending on the content of the upload, students can provide comments or annotations that are tied to specific moments or part of the content. So for example, CLAS has been used with art history students who analyze and make specific comments about a piece of art and tie their comments to specific aspects of the artwork. In our project, students provided feedback at specific time in the video and tied it to a specific skill the student was demonstrating in the counseling video. So they might say something like, oh, I really liked your use of an open question here to encourage the client to further expand on their concern. Or at this moment in the video, when the client began to tear up, an empathic response that named their feelings would have really helped to make them feel heard or understood. So this slide is just a screenshot of CLAS, and this was our instructor view. So we had grouped students into groups, and each group's videos were listed, and then the annotations for each video came up in the right-hand column. We've blocked out the students' names, but it identifies which student is making the comment. And then if you click on the comment, it will show you where exactly in the video that comment was made. So although, as we said, we used CLAS, and although I'm not going to get into all the different tools that are available to you, we wanted you to know that there are a variety of tools out there that can be helpful to incorporate feedback into your teaching. And so this is just a screenshot from ArtsIST, that talks about some of the tools: Canvas, Compare, iPeer, Peer Scholar. And if you're not part of arts, I know that a CTLT consultant could help you further to get information about what kind of tool might be useful for you in incorporating a peer feedback activity into your class. So the details of this slide really aren't important. I just want you to know that there are a variety of tools out there. So we wanted to share a little bit with you our findings from our study to give you a quick snapshot of what our students thought about our peer feedback assignment. So we had students fill out a survey, and although we had hoped to also do a focus group, the focus group was due to happen late March, and due to COVID, unfortunately, we were not able to do that. However, our students did give us, through the surveys, gave us some information, and they told us that overall, our students found that giving and receiving and reflecting on their feedback was helpful in their learning of the skills. They also told us that the written peer feedback assignment helped them connect the feedback to the specific skill that they were demonstrating. It gave them time to think about their feedback that they were providing to their peers, and they liked the written feedback assignment in addition to verbal feedback, but it was really divided as to whether or not our students felt that this kind of the written feedback was more advantageous than the oral feedback that we had already been doing. And this slide just shows that our students told us that this assignment did help them develop their core skills from term 1, and it helped them to reflect on their own work. However, we asked them if it helped them with their skills from term 2, and they said it didn't. And this made sense to us because the skills that we teach them in term 2 are more problem solving and planning and goal setting with a client. And we realized that in a 10-minute practice video, they weren't really able to get into those skills. The last thing the students told us was that although many of them hadn't used CLAS before this assignment, they told us that using the technology was really not a problem and did not hinder their learning. And that was a real relief for us because we were a little bit nervous about introducing this technology, but it really did help that we had a representative from Arts ISIT come to the class and give them an overview and an explanation of how to use it, how to upload their video, how to make annotations, etc. So I'm going to pause there for a minute just to see if anybody has any questions about our peer feedback assignment, our research about it, or any other questions in general. And if you do, feel free to either raise your hand or type in the chat. Yuri, please go ahead.
For using only the written feedback on CLAS instead of the verbal feedback?
So as Marie said, for this assignment, yes, they just used the written feedback that they typed into their annotations. However, all first term, we had been doing this triad work where they gave each other oral feedback in their practice sessions. But this assignment was looking at just written feedback.
So was there any reason you chose written feedback instead of the verbal feedback for this one, or you just wanted to try both delivery methods and see which one students preferred more?
Yeah, I guess because we thought, and they had told us that the verbal feedback was helpful, we thought that perhaps having it written down and sort of more formalized process might be helpful. But I think you make a good point because, you know, what students said to us was, yeah, this was great, but we don't want to give up that oral feedback. And Marie will talk a little bit more about sort of our future plans, given that those results from our study.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. See a question in the chat from Jillian. Is there an option to provide a voice note in the program instead? Yes, there is. Using CLAS, you can make an audio annotation. The student and I believe instructors can also make audio annotations as well using the CLAS system. Okay, if there aren't any other questions, I'm going to hand it over to Marie.
Great, thanks. And just to add on to that, as I mentioned earlier, students submit a video recording to us for grading, and often, well, in the past, it's been we've provided written feedback. So we're thinking of providing our feedback in an audio format for the upcoming turn, again, to increase the connection that we're going to lose going to online. So that might be something that we'll also be learning very quickly. So from this assignment, we couple of our highlights of our learning that students really appreciate the face-to-face and formal feedback. And again, this is a consideration going forward, how we are going to continue that in teaching this course. The other important learning for us was that a formalized feedback process was useful in addition to, but not in replacement for, face-to-face feedback. which loops back to the point I made that we're working hard to continue to have both in the course that we'll be teaching. And key learning that learning new technology was definitely not a problem for the students. I probably had the greatest hesitation about that. And overall, as the instructor, I found CLAS to be quite user-friendly. And we just wanted to share with you a student quote after use of this formalized written feedback. Prior to the feedback assignment, I felt uncomfortable with the idea of having my classmates watching me and judging how I counsel a client. Once I provided feedback to others and received it from my peers, I now know the intentions of it is to help my communication skills and social work practice. Being able to receive feedback is a first step in understanding what others may see and where I could improve. Something I appreciate from this quote is the mention of learning the giving and the receiving feedback. They are sort of important skills, I find, especially in social work. I don't know in other disciplines. Feedback is connected in a lot of other courses. So the learning from this course often then transfers over to other classes, other coursework. So things that we're thinking about doing differently as we move forward, because we will be using this assignment again. We will be having the assignment closer to first term, because a 10-minute practice session does not provide the time for students to integrate some of the skills that we teach in second term. That was something that we were very happy, actually students acknowledged and pointed that out to us. We would also ask students about their learning in giving feedback. So to become more, ask them more specifically what it was, the specific learning, because they said it was helpful, but we need more specific information. What exactly was helpful? And the same as we would like to know specifically, what is it about the face-to-face feedback that they really appreciate? You know, for example, is it things like, you know, they have the opportunity to ask questions, or that the you know, being engaged with the person as they're providing feedback? So those are some areas that we will incorporate going forward. Okay, Kelly.
Okay, so just to kind of summarize our recommendations for using peer feedback, as we've mentioned, we felt it was really important to teach students how to give feedback. And I think, as Marie mentioned, and kind of the student quote, we were surprised how important that was to them and that piece of learning. And we kind of knew this because at the start of our class, when we have them practice in triads and watch each other counsel, we hear students say things like, "Oh, we think you did a really good job. Oh, that was great." So we realized it was really important for us to teach them how to give meaningful feedback that they could actually use to improve their skills. As many of you know, I think sometimes students are hesitant to critique or even give constructive feedback. They want to be positive with each other, but we really reinforce the fact that the whole point of getting feedback is to determine how you can improve and where you can change. So we needed to teach them how to give this constructive feedback to help each other. The second point is recommendation is just to make your instructions really clear. Our students needed to know the specific expectations of them. So for example, they needed to give 5 annotations of their own work and 5 annotations on each of their peers' work. These annotations or comments needed to be both include positive feedback, or so highlight what was going well or done well in the video, as well as give suggestions for a way to change or improve. And finally, we really realized that it helped, we had to help students figure out how to use this feedback. So in our case, including the written reflection, really helped them think about the feedback they received and how to incorporate that feedback into their ongoing skill development. So those are kind of the three summaries from our experience. So, oh, Isabeau, question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I had a few questions. So one was in the context of online teaching, would the face-to-face, will that become like something that you're doing in small breakout rooms, live, sort of synchronous? That was one question.
Good question. Yes, we imagine that students will be doing practice, their triad work in breakout rooms. We're still unsure if we're going to do that part synchronous or have them practice, and then we'll set up times to join each group individually.
Okay. So you would be there kind of as observers as well in some cases.
Yeah, that's what we did in face-to-face. When they practice in their triads, we would pop into groups and observe and give some verbal feedback as we watch their practice.
Oh, great, thanks. And then the other question I had is, or two. One is, when the peers commented in class on the video, do they see what the self has already reflected and put as comments? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes. And I can't remember. Do you remember that, Marie?
Kelly, what I recall is, so as Kelly mentioned, we broke them into groups of 4, and within the group, I understand they could see the comments from others. So out of our class of 17 or 18, they were divided into smaller groups. And the feedback was shared, not with everybody in the whole section that they were part of.
Right, but they can see what other people have already written
within their small group.
Yeah.
And we did ensure that they did their personal feedback. So they evaluated their own work first before students were allowed to make comments on their peers' work.
Great, thank you. I'll stop there.
And I just want to add to that, what I found in reading the comments is that seemed to build engagement as well. Like they were reading other feedback and building upon that, so there was interaction within that process. So it seemed to be helpful, beneficial.
We were thinking about using peer feedback for resume review. So for our intake workshop, students are taught how to put together an application package consisting of a cover letter and resume. So we thought it would be nice to get peer feedback for some students on how they're doing with their cover letters, their resumes, and then other students can see sort of, what they're competing against, but also ways that they could improve their own work.
Okay. And have you thought about sort of what technology you would use to do that?
Previously, we've tried to use Canvas, but I wanted, because this year they won't have that chance to interact with each other in person during the workshops, it might be nice to set up more of a, a breakout group type of debrief in person so they can chat through it versus just providing written. But we haven't, really planned it out yet.
I know Google Docs might be a way that they could both be in a breakout group and also work, sort of give comments on that written feedback. That might be a possibility. Thank you for sharing, Sarah. Any challenges that you foresee?
Definitely the idea of just trying to get students to participate, and then that nervousness, I guess, to get other people's feedback.
Right. Okay, thanks, Sarah.
If I could just comment on that, the process of giving and receiving feedback, it can, I have found in our context, students can feel quite vulnerable in both roles, right? Of giving, receiving, you don't want to hurt someone's feelings or to even receive it, it's and can be common to want to explain, justify. So in our class, I do spend time talking about that, acknowledging that's real, and then shifting it to some of the things that we've mentioned, that it is constructive, it's learning, and why we talk about phrasing it. I don't know if you've heard about the feedback sandwich. I don't know if that's a term that's still used. It was many, many years ago. Say something positive, and then you enter something constructive, possible areas of change, and then wrap up with a positive comment. And some students have said, but there's been nothing positive. And I said, there always, always, always is. So to look for that, and that's even, I think, reinforcing just a lens of both working in a supportive way, a strengths approach to this, and knowing that it is hard for everybody. And I share too my experiences. It's hard for me to receive feedback. And I'll often take it to a real personal level. So we do have time for that. So just to share that it may be something, talking about the process of it can be helpful. And that might be more so in our context where it's in a role of being, client counselor, but I still think it can apply to other contexts as well. And I found that many of our students have really, really high expectations. So they're kind of hearing the feedback sometimes as, they're kind of grading it, A, B, C, or, 7 out of 10 or whatever. And I will explain, no, it's not about that, to look at it, that it's to be positive. And you do with it what you want. There's still that choice involved there. So I just wanted to add that on. Sorry, thank you.
Thanks, Marie. Jillian, I see you have your hand up, and then I think Tamara does too. So.
Hi. So I just wanted to share some of the ways that I've incorporated peer feedback in my own classroom, particularly this summer term. And then I was curious what other people might have done or are thinking about doing, because I'd love to incorporate more of it. So I have a major written assignment that I assign a peer review to. So in Canvas, there's the function, of course, you can do a peer review, just click it, and it's either anonymous or not. So I have them, they all get one of one another's major assignments, and they offer feedback. And it's part of a scaffolded assignment series, so they can incorporate that feedback or not, depending on how they feel. And so that's one aspect of it, which I found helpful. But I also incorporated discussion group. So I have discussion boards, and then I say for full marks, they have to comment on one another's posts, which is like an informal way to give feedback to one another's thoughts. And I also incorporated a breakout group because there was asynchronous and synchronous assignments. And as part of the synchronous session, they discuss things with one another. They give feedback on a small thing like a thesis statement. And then they have a post-assessment where they can put that feedback into use and revise the statement. So those are some of the ways that I've incorporated it this particular term, but I'm just looking for more ideas. So if anyone wants to offer that up, I would really appreciate it.
Wow, thanks, Jillian. I have a question. When they comment on each other's major assignment, do you provide a rubric for how they're supposed to comment or what they're to comment on?
I haven't given rubrics so far, but I do give instructions. I say to use annotations directly on the document, or to download it and provide like track changes just on their grammar, for instance, or if they, and then to say 2 things that are that they think they're doing well, and 2 constructive comments about what they could improve. I tend to just make it simplified, and then I give them the opportunity to do a summative response. So out of 5, what would you rate that? But I tell the students that they're not going to receive that mark. I will still mark the assignment. It's just for their knowledge and reference.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Wow, you've incorporated a lot of peer feedback.
I tried.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing. Tamara?
I think you need to do one of these workshops, Tamara. We'll join yours.
Tamara? Is
I think
Tamara
she's
there?
Sorry,
Carmen.
sorry, my computer's acting up on me today. Can you hear me?
Well,
Now
I
we can, yes.
Yep.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's my computer's been acting up. It actually kicked me out for a little bit. So I've been doing some, I guess, research, informal research through all of this pivoting, and I've been looking into what came across in some of the stuff I've been looking at is instead of feedback, they do something called feed forward. There's a lot of research out there that I'm finding about a process called feed forward, which sounds a lot like what we're talking about. And I think you've categorized it more as a formative assessment. So giving feedback before having peers or instructor, giving feedback in time to allow the students to actually do some revisions before they do their submission. So the feed forward looks at it more as here are some things you could strengthen even further. Here are some things you're doing well, and if you could incorporate that a bit more. And it's more that forward looking as opposed to the here's my assessment of what you've done. So I think it's kind of a fine line, but I'm finding that quite interesting. I haven't done enough reading on it to really be able to speak intelligently on it, but just enough to be intrigued by that. So it's something that I'm going to explore. And I think, Jillian, that was sort of one of the things you were kind of talking about a little bit, and maybe just looking up feed forward as a scaffolding process you might find that helpful. From my experience, which I wanted to share, I've actually tried a couple different things. One is where students will give a summative feedback. So groups will do they have to create an interactive activity. Of course, this will look different online, but they had to create an interactive activity in the classroom to lead a learning experience for their students or for their peers, and they on a topic, and they weren't allowed to use PowerPoint. Now, of course, I ended up having a group then went to Prezi, so I had to explain to them no PowerPoint or Prezi. I wanted it to be an interactive experience. And they came up with some really cool things. And then what I do is I get the rest of the class they have a rubric, and they're thinking about the rubric as the activity is taking place. And then at the end, I give them about 15 minutes to give some feedback on that rubric. I summarize those. I actually use Canvas quiz for that because it's the only way that allows it to be, it's a quiz, but it's not graded. So they can give their feedback in those, the rubric is in the quiz per se, and then I can download into Excel, so I can summarize it into a Word document for the students who presented. I can then anonymize that feedback, but I can see what each student had said. So it affects both the grade for the team that did the interactive activity. Half their grade comes from peer assessment and half comes from me. And I have a very defined rubric. Everybody knows in advance what that is. And then the other side of it is those who gave the feedback are actually, that contributes to their active learning grade. I don't do participation in the course, I do active learning. And active learning includes constructive feedback to peers. So because I can track what their comments were, I can see whether they've been constructive and not just saying, oh, everything was great, or I hated it, where they actually come up with some ideas on how to improve. But unfortunately, the technology in Canvas is somewhat limited. So the best that we could find, I worked with CTL in the Okanagan, and putting a rubric into a quiz format allows you then to download it into Excel and then to copy paste those comments into a Word document to provide back to the group that presented or that did the interactive activity, where it's anonymized to them. They don't know who said what, but I can see who said. So all sorts of sort of workarounds. The other thing that I've done is on a written piece, I've given the students an opportunity to grade each other. So in groups, they do different projects which have a written report, and I get them to, or I haven't done it for a while, I get them to assess each other using the same rubric that I would use, and part of the grade comes from peers and part comes from me. But through all of that, what I've realized is that students are not good at giving feedback. Students are actually sometimes less comfortable giving feedback than they are receiving feedback. So that's a really interesting dynamic to have to play with, is students don't know how to give feedback. And yet it's a skill, it's an enabling competency they're going to need in the workforce. But and they don't know how to give. So I've learned that I have to kind of coach them into giving feedback because they're not good at giving feedback.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that was our experience as well, right? When they're watching their peers counsel, they would say things like, good job. Oh, you did a good job, right? And so we agree that that piece of teaching them how to give feedback that's useful, because everybody wants to be kind, but so teaching them how to give that positive piece, but also to comment in a way that is helpful, but also give suggestions for where they could improve is really is a skill that was part of this whole process. Marie, did you have further comments about that?
Um, Thank you so much for sharing all that. And I've experienced similar things, incorporating it. And I've also learned a lot from what you shared. I wasn't aware about the quiz function and all that. So I'm going to hold on to that and carry that forward. I'm just noticing our time, and I'm also noticing Isabel posted something about feedback forward. Thank you for introducing that and for saying that. It seems like we incorporate some of those in the work that we do, both in the terms of the verbal feedback and the written feedback that we incorporate into this, into our class. So I'm thinking, just due to time, that we need to wrap up. Does that seem right, Kelly? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So again, we just want to summarize that we talked a little bit about the benefit of peer feedback for student learning, how it can be useful in online learning to help students both monitor their learning and create community and engagement. And we shared our experience of using both verbal and written feedback, and hopefully given you a chance to start to think about how you could use it in your content